He said he had some other call going on. I think we're going live now, by the way. It's just FYI.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think he was talking about. Let's see. Yeah, he said I think he had a call, unfortunately. So, he didn't want to talk to you again.
Okay.
Well, I'm assuming we're live, so we'll go ahead and get started here. But hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the TrustedSec live chat here, whatever we call it. I should probably know the name of that. But each month we have new guests come on from TrustedSec to kind of talk a little about what they're working on, their practices, and just kind of BS about things that they're seeing in industry, how things are going, and kind of just talk for a little bit. And this week I have the very fortunate pleasure of talking to Carlos Perez, our dark operator. Carlos, we've known each other for I think like 15 years or something like that. It seems like it's been a long time.
I think almost 20. It was
Don't tell me
in,
20 because that sounds so long.
uh, let's see, you and I started working in the Metasploit project back when we were migrating from,
Pearl.
from Ruby 1.8 to
Oh, that's right.
1.9.
Yeah.
That was 2012, 2011. No, yeah,
It's been
yeah,
a,
it's a long
it's been a
time.
while.
It's
It's
a
been a
long
long
time.
time. And
Yeah, it's a long time.
Carlos and I have coded in our underwears before in the same hotel room before as well. So
Yes.
that was at HackCon, right, in West Virginia.
Yes. That's when you added the GUI to
For Fast
fast
Track,
track.
yes, I frantically was coding the GUI for my talk the next day, and wanted to release the new GUI for that, and that was a lot of fun. I miss that type of thing, like being able to, coding on airplanes and coding in hotel rooms and like coding whenever I had the opportunity to code. So I need to get back more into that, but things have changed a
Uh,
little bit on the busy side of my house.
I still remember when you challenged yourself. We were at the hotel room and you went like, you know what? It would be cool if I had a GUI for fast track, but I've never coded HTML before. And you start going through tutorials on how to code in HTML and spent all night coding in HTML until you got a proof of concept of the GUI actually working. And then you go like, Carlos, challenge yourself, and go like, okay, I'm going to come up with something to inject any type of payload into memory from inside my interpreter. And we spent all night coding.
That's right. That was a lot of fun. We were up till like 3 or 4 o'clock in the
Yep.
morning, and then we woke up at like 7, and then went or 7 or 8, and went to the con. Those were the days, and
And
I can't do that anymore. Like I feel like if I stay up till like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, I'm not getting up until like 10, 11 o'clock in the afternoon anymore.
I'm the same way. For me, somebody flipped the switch when I turned 31. I remember distinctively when I turned 31, that superpower went away.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, the ability to drink all night and then wake up the next morning fresh and just be able to continue, it just doesn't happen anymore. So
Yep, that's true.
well, so tell us a little bit about your roles here at TrustedSec and a little bit about yourself for the audience. I'm sure a lot of folks know you, but what do you do at TrustedSec? And I'll give a little context on the history of the research division. But bringing you aboard. I mean, what, you've been here for 4 or 5 years?
Years.
Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's been crazy and awesome. But yeah, give a little bit of intel on the research division that we have here, and what we focus on.
Yeah.
Research and
So
training.
I'm the team lead for the research team. My team actually codes all of the internal tools that are used mainly by the red team. In addition to that, some of the tools we've written tools for the IR team as well as for our pen testing, the force team. In addition to that, we have done a bit of research on some exploits, some vulnerabilities. On my side, I'm kind of like a jack of all trades inside of TrustedSec. In addition to leading the team, I coordinate and work closely with marketing. I work with Andrew from the Purple team. I provide support to Larry on some stuff for the Force team. I also work with the IR team on some of their cases that they're having. Yeah, I'm kind of like
Jack
wherever
of all
I can add
trades.
value, I'll jump in. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one thing that's always been an awesome quality of yours is like you're always hopping into everything and helping wherever you possibly can, both from the team side, as well as how you lead, and then obviously you in the front there. So it's interesting that the research team here is kind of the brainchild of Justin Elzy, where a few years ago, this has been probably 7 or 8 years ago, maybe it was 6 or 7 years ago. Justin was like, hey, things are getting a little bit tougher out there.
Mhm.
When it comes to companies having defenses or at least visibility in their environments, especially when we start looking at red teams and organizations that have more of a sophisticated security program. And he's like, I think we really need to focus on setting up a red team. I'm sorry, a research team. And
Mhm.
and so I looked at it. I'm like, okay, like what's that going to look like? And from a business perspective, it's a hard pill for a lot of companies to swallow because it's typically pure overhead. But when you look at what you're trying to accomplish, if you want to be able to compete, I think, in this space, especially from companies that have sophisticated security programs, and you want to get into more of the adversary emulation side of the house, and what you're looking at from a attacker's perspective, you need to have the same types of tools and techniques and weaponization of C2 and everything else that you have, that a nation state would have, or some of these higher level ransomware groups. So we decided to kind of plunge down into the research team and get a few folks in place there. Obviously yourself and everybody
Mhm.
else there. Scott, Kevin, Chris, just phenomenal people, super brilliant in each in their own rights, in their own areas of expertise, and really start to build out this team. And I think when you look at the capabilities that we have now, it's pretty impressive. I mean, I don't think our C2 has ever been detected before, ever, right?
No.
Yep. It's been how many years since we've had that?
It's been a while since we've had Scoutmaster.
Yeah.
It's right now in version 3. We have been using it for a very long time. Recently, we did a full rewrite. I remember I was talking with Kevin, who is the lead for the project itself, and we were having a series of calls. And at one call, he told me like, "Okay, the guys want this other feature. We're adding it again. I feel like we have way too much duct tape," and that kind of like triggered me coming from a pure software development vendor side. And I went like, you know what? Let's do something. I don't want to pay for this in the future, so let's do a full rewrite
Yeah.
of it. Let's get rid of all the duct tape, all the bubble gum, and make it as solid as possible. We sat down with Lang from the red team, and we went like, what features do you need? What are critical? What are all of your SOPs? They give us access to their repository of all of their actions that they take. We participate on all of their after actions for everything. So we know a bit on how they operate. In addition, we have Kevin, Chris, Scott that come from the intelligence community where they have performed similar actions, and we just merged together into one single feature set, and we did a full rewrite of it. And the guys so far have loved it. They've been using it. We have a lot of capabilities specifically for flexibility in terms of like, let's say Hans was in an engagement and he was telling us, hey, Carlos, we encounter in this environment, they have two EDRs. It's kind of difficult to operate inside of them because the defender sets our operational tempo and also our tools. And we were moving too slow because of how tuned they had the EDR and other settings in the machine. But he was able to reach a phone, an IP phone. And Kevin goes like, okay, I know that phone. I have one here at home that runs MIPS. And since we wrote everything as modular and as compatible as possible, we were able to modify, compile, and prep an image in 2 days. We flashed the phone with our implant, same implant that we run on other Linux hosts. It was just make some modifications to run in that phone OS, and we just moved completely over into the phone, and we were able to operate from there. There have been other cases where we have gotten access to some really cool software in the customer environment. Cannot go into details due to the NDAs and everything. And we have been able to port the agent very quickly and get it up and running in those environments just because we follow all of those practices. So we're not running purely .NET like we see some other ones out there, or purely Python. It's C. We have focused mainly on C for most of our agents. We have multiple stagers across different languages, but we wrote it in a way where we can adapt as quickly as possible depending on the environment that we're operating in.
I think that's some of the cool ones. So when I see the red team reports come out, those are the ones I usually like read through just to kind of keep my eye on things as how awesome some of these hacks are. And I
Yeah.
think it's been really cool to see like the shift in that, right? To be kind of creative in ways that you need to, but having the framework and underlying tools and capabilities, not just from the red team though, but from the force and the IR team, and how kind of they all play together in supporting each of the missions of the different groups, and then being able to have the top capabilities out there, it really in the industry, to have the tools and techniques and the methods, and obviously the red team from a discipline perspective and knowledge perspective, and being able to have more OPSEC when it comes to going into the infrastructure and being able to have predefined things that you can do to start to kind of comb the system and understand, what defenses are in place, what evasive techniques do you have to do, really getting into that mindset of, attacker versus defender and, those types of things. So team has done a really good job. So what are some of the fun ones you can talk about as far as things where the research team has really had an impact on an engagement that you can remember or recall?
Let's say, for example, I follow one of the rules that I read from Stanley McChrystal's book, Team of Teams. So from time to time, my guys will shadow the red team operations and they'll participate in those operations, because since we work so closely, I need them to know how they work. Chris actually joined recently one of those, and we've seen that there's, in the industry in general, an over focus on Windows. Chris, given his background, is very comfortable operating also in Linux. So we gain access to a Linux host. And when he started operating from that Linux host, he was able to really abuse that Linux is ignored by most people out there, by most corporations, 99%. In many interesting ways. Yeah. So we were able to code a malicious PAM module that captured all credentials, encrypted those credentials on disk. So then later on, we could pull them back in a secure manner. In addition to that, he was able to gain access to a share from where they were running shared code, where we were able to put specifically crafted payload for that environment that then they did us the favor of replicating across all of their hosts. And all of a sudden, we're running across all of their Linux servers. So yeah, I think one of our best advantages is that when you look at many companies out there, they follow, for those who have read the book, the Unicorn Project, I think it is called, they have the concept of a Brent. So you have Brent, who is the guy that knows everything, and when he goes on vacation, everybody runs around like a chicken without its head, trying to figure out how stuff works. Many people or many groups out there, the way that they operate is that they have their small subject matter experts, but when they're not there, all of a sudden you have an impact on the performance of that team. It happens a lot. Companies that don't have a research team for tooling depends on consultants having the time to work extra hours, work on the side, or develop tools during the engagement. In our case, since we work very closely with our guys, they do develop some tools and some research, but then they can leverage us to fine tune those tools, or even go like, hey, we don't have the time, we need this capability. And we're able to develop those. And that's where we have been able to work very closely with Lang's team and add quite a bit of value. Also, given the experience of my guys, many times we're going, we try to be gentle when we try to consult them on OPSEC stuff. Then again, my guys used to be nation states, so they're overly paranoid to a detriment sometimes, but it's good.
Yeah, the strengths of the team too. I mean, Kevin, Chris, Scott, they all have varying strengths. What's some of the coolest things that you see from each of them?
Well, Chris he's a teacher, naturally. We will develop stuff. Chris will prep videos to train the guys. He will do write-ups to train the guys.
Yeah.
And he's very efficient at making sure that our guys know their tools, know how they work, and he integrates very well with them. Kevin is like the savant of implant development. That's why we get called to leverage Kevin's expertise and history. So Kevin sometimes will go like, okay, we have this idea. Yeah, that could take us like a month to develop. 3 days later, Kevin comes like, here it is. I coded it. And Scott is all of his knowledge on reverse engineering, on C, and on embedded devices. so we can leverage all of that very quickly also. So each one brings different areas that allows us to code, develop multiple platforms. And in addition to that, be effective at transmitting that information to the team and making sure to bring them up to speed on those tools and increase their capabilities.
Well, I think that was a cool thing I saw with the release of Scoutmaster 3. Part of it was kind of like a UI around it, right? And the red team, I think, was like salivating at each little tiny nugget in there because it was things that they were doing, right? That was either manual or they had a playbook for or something to that effect. But Chris would see or Kevin would see like, hey, we'd automate this or add this little thing here to make it easier for the guys and gals. So it's just one of those things where I think everybody's working together collaboratively to try to really build the best type of streamlined process that you can use, right? And really taking that software development approach to be able to do it and be agile in nature, to be able to move fast, move quick, to be able to get things out as quick as possible to specific tasks. And I'll see all the time where maybe somebody on the red team runs into a situation or an issue and the whole team jumps in on it, right? And they're figuring out the best way to kind of tackle that obstacle.
Yeah, and one of the things that they actually enjoyed the most is that Chris decided, I'm going to build this API to use for the UI, but also I'm going to teach them how to use it in Python. So he did a series of kind of like lunch and learns with them and videos and documentation. Like, this is how the API works. Here are some of the examples. Then I worked with him on all of the examples and I polished them a bit while he worked on adding more features into it. And we're pleasantly surprised that that's one of the features that the guys enjoyed the most. All of a sudden, we'll have Melvin come over and say, I automated all of this attack chain completely in Python. And then comes Lang and goes like, oh, I automated everything that we are doing around Active Directory. I automated it into chunks to make my life a lot simpler. Same thing with Scott, same thing with Otbar and some of the other guys. They just simply go like, oh, you gave us this capability where we can automate everything and everything's an API call and you give us examples, documentation. Awesome. And we just gave them enough rope for them to just run with it. And they just have been leveraging it, expanding it on their own and coming up with new ways that we never thought of. One of the guys that we love the most is Hans. Every time he comes with the weirdest questions, weirdest scenarios, and we're going like, we'll never see that. And all of a sudden he comes in like, hey, I encountered this scenario and go like, oh, crap. So now when we write some of our features, we go like, will it survive a Hans? That is how we go for it. And I mean it in a good way. He has a way of thinking over there at the red team where he looks at all possible angles that we may have missed. And many times we just trying to get ahead of the game, like going like, could this break here? Could this break over here? Okay, let's ping Hans. Hey, Hans, run with this, test it out, and let us know what you find. And he's kind of like our QA. He'll come back with a bunch of stuff for us to modify, improve, or simply go like, hey, it works.
Yeah, and I think that's creativity that you have there. And and I mean, the coupling between that, the red team, being as creative as they are, and then with the flexibility to kind of impact agent and we focus on from a post-exploitation perspective is really awesome. And you obviously have done a lot, both on the research side and the team and leading the team, but also I think, as of most recently too, being extremely active on the Sysmon video tutorials that we've been doing online. Yep. And, you first released the community edition of the Sysmon community, basically the handbook of Sysmon, because there wasn't a lot of great documentation out there. Still isn't a lot of great documentation. I think ours is the only one out there that's the most comprehensive. But but then you started releasing a lot of the videos. So why Sysmon, and how's that been going through kind of the different series? You just finished, I think, the last in the series as of recent. What's your feedback from that?
Yeah, so Sysmon, I've been active with it since version 1. I've been blogging about it, using it, playing with it. And then DoD integrated into their image. And then DoD came to us and told us, like, we want a Sysmon training. And we developed that training. And we have actually delivered that to the Marine Corps multiple times. And as we were working with it, I remember asking, like, hey, there's a lot of value here that it's kind of like bottled up in a PowerPoint that is not serving the community at large. And I asked for permission to make some of that stuff public. And I came out with the Sysmon Community Guide. And we were struggling a bit trying to get people interested in Sysmon because a lot of people are kind of like fighting fires. And we were like, okay, probably we should do a series of videos to explain it better. A lot of people like reading, others like videos. I wanted to learn about video editing. So it was kind of like a good match. And I decided to pitch the idea over to Nathan at the marketing team. And then I started working with Rosa, who does all of our awesome thumbnails for our videos. And yeah, I started pushing out videos thinking, oh, I'll be able to record all of this stuff in a month. Very naive that I was in terms of the amount of work that goes into recording and video editing.
Crazy, yeah,
yeah. So now
your setup is absolutely impressive. I like the different lighting, and definitely rivals and is better than mine. So
it has improved across all of the videos. You can see it improving the audio, video.
And you're taking, is that still from an iPhone?
No, right now I'm using a Sony camera, CVE10.
Yeah. I got the,
still all of my stuff is being jury rigged with 3D printed parts that I printed, holding the camera, attaching it to the desk. Same thing for my light box. It's a $20 Amazon CRI bulb with a grid made out of duct tape, hold in by clips.
Well, duct tape it can fix anything.
Yeah, to a 3D printed mount in ABS. Microphone I changed to a dynamic one because this room has a very bad echo. So I've been learning a lot. So you'll see that the videos have improved across time. It's a total of 22 videos. I think we recently released video 16. I think it's the last one we have released. So there's still 6 more to come out. They come out every Monday. I'm brutally honest on all of the videos. I'll tell it like it is. This works. This doesn't work. This is a good scenario. This is not a good scenario. And I'm trying to add our experience from what we do, what I see in the IR team, what they're seeing from different actors. In addition to that, as I work with Andrew, what we get from threat intelligence that is important for them to address when they're working on their purple teams. In addition to that, I go like, what would make a red teamer's life completely miserable if somebody was monitoring for this? And then I use that feedback into the videos that we have been putting and also in the recommendations. In fact, I remember when I first put out the one on network monitoring, Lang wasn't too happy on that one. He goes like, oh, if customers start using this, we're not able to SOX proxy. We're not going to be able to do a bunch of stuff. And go like, yeah, that's the purpose of it. to bring their level a bit higher.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I think, Sysmon is such a great product and tool just from a visibility perspective. I think the struggle that a lot of people have with it is that it's not, cut and paste. You don't just, pop it in your environment and then all of a sudden it works. I mean, it takes a lot of configuration. It takes a lot of baselining your environment and understanding your environment. But ETW to me is probably the most powerful thing that you could probably implement on a Windows agent, as well as, they have, Sysmon for Linux and OS X as well. But when you look at, talking with Tyler and the team on the IR side, I think a few others have said this as well, Leo and a few others, but if you had access to one type of data source on a computer, on a Windows endpoint, what would it be? And they would say, Sysmon, right? Hands down.
Yep.
It's by far, the most valuable, especially when it's, tuned and tailored in a way that allows you to get some visibility. So I think, people really struggle with, 1, the deployment of it, 2, the management of it, and 3, the continuous current feeding. And I think detection engineering, solves a lot of those problems, threat hunting and detection engineering in environments. But most companies don't really have those dedicated resources, specifically for that, and they're fighting other fires. So it starts to become kind of a challenge.
Yeah, and it brings out the concept that security is not a tool. It's actually a human factor, a political factor, a leadership factor, and how you implement stuff. How much time do you give to do the stuff that you need to do? One of the things that I've seen a lot is that people go like, oh, I have Sysmon. I don't need to enable PowerShell logging. I don't need to enable Windows auditing, and go like, no, it's an enhancement tool. A lot of people, same thing happens with EDRs. They deploy EDRs and they forget about enabling a bunch of other stuff. And they trust blindly that the EDR works. They go next, 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 glorious reboot, and then go like, oh, we're covered. And when we look at work that MITRE has done, where you look at what we have done in our own red team engagements, every security product has gaps. Because every vendor out there is trying to deal with the concept of friction. The more friction I have by default in my install, the more support tickets I'm going to get, the less happy the customer is going to be, and he won't renew the contract. That's why in their training, all of them cover tuning. All of them cover how to set up custom rules, how to change alerts. Even with vulnerability management, when I worked at Tenable and I dealt with everything that was Nessus, we had a bunch of training for customers on how to set the different levels, how to tune the alerts, how to recast some of the priorities and everything. And people don't know that. They just trust blindly. I have a blinky box that is keeping me secure. I'm okay. And that's why one of the first things, or at least two videos that I did for Sysmon initially, was where I go like, look at all of these CDRs, look at their different gaps, look at the different sources, and you need to test and you need to validate. So you address all of those gaps and you have redundancy across them. Same thing when I did the video based on questions that I got from a lot of people. I go like, look, I sat down with Andrew and we were discussing like, hey, Andrew, what are the type of questions that you would do for doing detection engineering? And we went through them and I did that video where I go like, hey, first of all, you need to break out all of your assets depending on what is their business purpose, what are all of the supporting components, and what are all of the users. Then you build your configurations around those, because every system is going to have different software, it's going to have different behaviors. The more you can group them and then fine tune to each one of those groups, the better it's going to be your detection engineering and your threat hunting that you should be doing regularly in your environment to be able to find what's happening inside of that. And that's why I spent quite a bit of time. I think it was like a 20-minute video on that one.
Yeah, we had a question from Bjorn here. What do you guys think about not having Sysmon event IDs for PowerShell 4104, 4103, 800 with process GUID so that it is possible to link them back with ease to a Sysmon event ID one? Yeah, I'll kick it off and I'll give it to you. But I mean, I think it's when you look at parent-child process relationships and like Markov chaining, I mean, that's some of the main areas that I really had a lot of success or have a lot of success with, kind of identifying unusual things that are kicking off or being able to investigate something. So I think being able to piece together the process tree from specific things that could be potentially malicious is very valuable. And when you look at like things like Sysmon, you can do the and or operators too, right? You can also do better correlation in the back end if you're using something like Azure Sentinel with KQL or something to that effect. But you can get really refined with a lot of these like active states and be able to reassemble essentially process trees that kick off specific types of attacks. I think that's definitely hugely valuable to save some time, as well as really start to spot things that would be potentially malicious in your environment. We spent a lot of time on Markov chaining at Binary, looking at parent-child process relationships, which happen to be a really high treasure trove for us, especially for living off the land, PowerShell execution, DLL imports, things like that. Everything starts to get pretty easy to spot in many cases, especially from an unusual behavior side from that type of data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when it comes to, in the case of Sysmon, two specific event types that would work there. One is going to be the loading of this system.management.ni.dll, which is going to be that engine for PowerShell itself. It will give you the image, it will give you the process GUID
and
that then you can
match
to those
as well. .dll, right? The NA
yes.
And then the automation .dll, right? I still got it.
And in addition to that, we just go with simple PowerShells running, either PWH or PowerShell itself. So you're able to track both of those. You'll get that process GUID, and then you can correlate with the process ID that you get for that specific host during that specific time. But if we have process GUID for those events, it would be totally awesome, because I really hate going and helping out in an IR and all of a sudden I have this ran at this time, but there's no logging, log off events being logged. All of a sudden process GUID, log on IDs they process IDs and logon IDs, they get reused constantly, multiple times an hour. So all of a sudden, I'm landing on a box, and without the logon started, logon finish, I don't have logon IDs that then I can force and bring all of those process IDs down to only a small group that then I can just hunt for process started, process terminated, which a lot of people actually don't log, or they enable process logging, but they forgot about command line. So Sysmon does provide great defaults there to aid in that tracking.
Yeah, for sure. Yes, hopefully I answered your question there, Bjorn. But I appreciate it, and feel free to answer any more questions on the stream. We're all taking a look at that. But obviously being on the research side, you get to see a lot of capabilities, both I think for new research that's coming out in the industry as well as from adversaries. What do you see as the biggest challenge, I think, for defenders that we continuously run up against in most of the environments, especially on the red teaming side, where for customers that have a relatively mature monitoring detection program, where does that kind of fit, and where are their main gaps and weaknesses you typically see, other than, I guess, Linux, right? I think everybody has that issue, but
there's Linux, there's networking devices. Both of those are ignored heavily. That's why we saw CISA this week actually come out with an advisory saying people, hey, start looking at your routers, start looking at your switches, at your VPN concentrators. In fact, when we look at many of our incident response stuff, it's either remote desktop protocols that are open out to the internet or VPN appliances that have not been patched properly. We see quite a bit of those. From our side, is if you start locking down a lot of those initial accesses, for example, macros are now disabled by default. A lot of people go like, oh, PowerShell, 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 but there's still Windows scripting hosts. And people forget completely about Windows scripting hosts, and we still use Windows scripting hosts, and it works very well. There are other methods outside of macros that still get Office to execute stuff for us that should be addressed. But at the end of the day, when I look at threat intel from multiple areas, all of them have different attack paths, stuff that gets abused a bit more than the other, but all of them focus on process detections. If I'm able to track process creation, process termination, and all of the metadata around that, I think that covers over 100 techniques in MITRE as a source, only having process creation, process termination as a source of information. Yes, we can change our parent process. Yes, we can do other stuff. But again, I follow Murphy's laws of combat, and I think law number 6 or 7 is like, professionals are predictable, but the world's full of amateur. A professional is going to actually go through the extra steps of making sure to hide that or break that parent process, parent and child process creation train of thought there on the system, but a lot of them don't, and it still works.
Well, it's funny. I'll see a lot of the advisories, especially that come out from CISA and from all these different groups like CLOP and everything else. And, they're using net commands, it's like net user / domain, or using IP, configs, net views, or using, all of these common, commands that you don't typically see a regular user executing in your environment, right? And if you do, maybe you have a baseline of those and you investigate, but it's not a common thing to see, a command prop be open and then all of a sudden, start dropping a bunch of net commands. So, it's not, it's interesting to see some of these groups that really haven't had to change much of their techniques at all, because they're still having a high level of success. And there's still a lot of, I would say, fewer companies that actually look at, their overall detection strategies and would be in a more mature categorization, I would say.
And you see it in the work that we do. For example, we stress heavily on our customers that they need to go through a path like, hey, do you have your vulnerability management in order? Then we go over to pen testing to test some of that stuff to make sure it's correct. Then we tell them after that, you should be moving over to purple teaming to make sure that you develop sound practices on how to develop good detections. And then on the advanced side, then you can have a red team engagement. And you see it from the engagements that we're having with customers across all of those levels, what works, what doesn't. I know that there's a lot of stuff that the force team does and it works perfectly that the customers that are able to get a red team, when we perform a red team, they have all of that stuff bottled down. They have all of those hatches closed. They cross all of their T's. They dotted all of their I's. And then that's when the red team comes in with a bit more advanced tooling, more time, different ROEs to work across all of that. And we see it across all of that spectrum as we try to guide customers across all of those series of services to bring up their maturity level in terms of how can they respond to all of these kinds of attacks and incidents.
Yeah, the red teams, and I think that's a big misconception. I think in a lot of our industry is that red teams are typically afforded more towards companies that have really locked down the basics, have a decent understanding of their environment. And what they want to be able to do is say, okay, well, we have things like Kerber roasting and basic password, credential stuffing kind of taken care of, maybe through MFA or other methods. We've done a lot, we shored up lateral movement as much as we possibly could. We've done a lot of these things that you typically see from a traditional pen test. Maybe we don't have LLM and R anywhere, MBNS or cloud infrastructure wise, we have a pretty good handle of that. So, the red team is more of a more capable security program that has a decent monitoring detection program and looking for where they may have gaps at as far as detection, initial access, and then everything through the MITRE chain around response, right? And so but a lot of companies will say, hey, I need a red team, and they're not anywhere near being ready for that yet, right?
Yeah, and that's true. And I remember I'm working closely with Ryan from sales on a couple of customers, and I like that our sales guys actually tell that to our customers. Sometimes our customers go like, I want this, and you'll see Ryan push back and say, but actually I think you should have this other service still first. And it's not that I don't want your money, it's just that I want what is best for you.
Yeah.
And I think what's best for you is if you move that. And I like that. I like that we do that. In fact, I was even talking with a friend of mine who works for a customer, and we have done multiple pen test engagements for them. And some of this stuff is still being repeated in some of the reports. And he was asking me, hey, Carlos, so when do you think we're going to be ready for a red team? I go like, when you don't have any repeats on the pen test side. And then you have a good purple team where you make some of those detections even more solid. A lot of people actually go out and go like, hey, I have a SIM that included a bunch of detections. But when you look at the different thresholds that it has, for example, Kerber roasting, what if instead of me, and the detection is, okay, let's say that somebody asks for 0x17 and I have 20 0x17s, that's when I'm going to trigger my alert. But what if I'm targeted? What if I'm only requesting one? What if I address that and all of a sudden it's not a 0x17, but I'm requesting a service account from a machine that has never requested it before? That should trigger another alert. And that is stuff that is not baked in and it's not in your most default rule sets and your detections. That's something that somebody has to go in, tune it, test it, and be able to validate other paths to it. But sadly, a lot of people just go like, oh, the vendor told me this, so I'm going with what the vendor said.
Right.
And there's no extra work there.
How do you, switching topics really quick too, how do you see some of the commercial products stand up to, our red team and more persistent attackers, both from like an EDR perspective, IPS, I guess you don't really see IPS too much anymore, but, even cloud-centric security products like, mail filters and things like that, the behavioral type of stuff. Like, would you say that we have a pretty easy time getting around that, especially if it's commodity and hasn't been kind of tuned to their own, or are they starting to get better and more difficult to evade?
They're getting more and more difficult to evade, and it all from my experience in research, it boils down to volume. If all of a sudden I come over with some research and we get a bypass, and we use that bypass on 100 hosts, the EDR in a week is going to have a rule for it, because all of a sudden the customer goes like, hey, we had a pen test or we had a red team engagement and they ran all of this across all of this host and they were able to execute here.
Right.
Or they may track us on some behavior down the road, and then they look at the entire attack path and they'll find what they have been missing based on their telemetry. Now I'm seeing that vendors are faster to reacting, but still they follow that concept of friction. If your installation is default more than likely, we're going to be able to bypass it very easily. One of the best examples, Rundle 32. Rundle 32 works across
It's so
every
difficult.
EDR.
Listen, being on the MDR side, Run DL32 is so difficult to get a handle on because so many applications and products, printers, things like that use it. And so you really have to, baseline an organization's environment around Run DLL32, look for those deviations, right? Because there's so many variations of Run DLL32 being allowed. And, we've been obviously using that for 30 years, if not more, for DLL imports. So it's, it's nothing new, but the problem is like the noise ratio to that, is
Very high.
very high. So obviously that's an opportunity for us on the red team.
Yeah, and that's where it boils down. Like, have you normalize your logs in your environment and look at all of your Rundle 32s and look what is normal. And then you have alerts for what is not normal. And you add multiple filters. Sometimes we'll see detections are specifically only for the command line. And you'll even see it on when we dump the rules from several vendors, and I won't mention them. Some of them will actually have like WMIPRVSC.exe. I go like, but you don't have the path. Yeah. It's only WMIPRV.exe. Let me test something. Let me rename my command WMIPRV.exe. Oh, I bypassed that rule completely because the rules are not.
Yeah.
There's an implicit level of trust that tends to be too high.
Yeah, well, I'll see that very commonly both on the EDR side, but as well as the detection engineering side, where the detections are written so specific off of an attack that if you just modify it in just a little bit, shape or form, you completely get around it. I see this obviously in AV as well. I was, doing a demo for just from one of my presentations, and I hadn't touched Windows Defender in a few months, and I was just curious to see like, Registry 32 happens to be one of like the most notorious and probably well documented, I think, or well detected, I would say, living off the land, because it's such an abnormal thing to happen in an environment, and just to get around Registry 32 detections was trivial. So, it's changing the attack slightly, right? So that it still looks the same, but it's different and gets around that type of detection, criteria that's there. But I'd also say that, if you're using commodity or default, we probably have a good understanding around what that is because we test these, in products ahead of time. But if you're going into an environment that has their own custom detections that are written, to the organization, that's like a landmine for us, right? I mean, that's hard for us to navigate because we don't know what detections you have in place. So it's this going really slow. And as you mentioned, try not to hit a threshold or a certain amount of noise that will eventually tip off the blue team. So, I guess some good advice here from this podcast is, make detections your own based off of your own environment. You'll have a much higher probability of spotting, adversaries in your environment versus, what you install in it from a product.
And also understand your products. For example, when we look at most EDRs, Microsoft Endpoint Defender, which is different than from regular Defender. Same thing for CrowdStrike, same thing for SentinelOne, same thing for Cyber Reason and every other one. There's a lot of work right now on ML, machine learning, on the behaviors, and matching multiple events to have rules. But what happens when you have moved laterally over to a domain controller and that domain controller doesn't have access to the internet? All of a sudden, in our own tests, from 20 all the way up to 40% of all of those rules are no longer triggering just because they don't have access to the internet, because they rely a lot on the cloud. And a lot of customers don't know that because they haven't gone through that detection engineering work of, hey, I'm setting up these rules. Hey, you know what? Let me test them just to make sure that they work. A lot of people don't test them. A lot of people will just grab whatever they want from GitHub, drop it there, and never have a testing framework developed or written to be able to validate all of that stuff.
Yep, and that's making security your own, right? It's not a tool, it's not a product. It's a culmination of a lot of things that I think build up your security program. So, well, with that, I think we're good on time. Any parting wisdom of words that you want to throw out there, or anything that? First of all, I want to say I'm really impressed. You didn't throw any F-bombs out or any inappropriate gestures that I didn't have to warn you this time either, which is great. So, I think you've come a long way,
I only do it on presential training when I'm with students and when I'm teaching the Marines.
Yeah, well, so Marines are used to it. Yeah, that's right. Carlos and I had given a training class at a certain location for the Marines, and he definitely had a potty mouth. So, but the Marines are used to it. So, but I was like, like, are we gonna get in trouble here? Oh, it's the Marines. We're fine. Yeah, we're good. So,
And that's the only same thing with Norwegians. I remember going to Norway and doing a training class, and then Andy and Rohan from SpectropOps were doing another one. And every time we encounter ourselves for lunch, they were going like, dude, are your students, did any of them smile? And go like, no. Are there any of them laughing? No. Crap. I don't know if we're getting to them. And then I remember I let slip kind of like one of my mannerisms that I typically use to describe stuff, just to perk them up after lunch, because it works. And then they start laughing. And in one of the breaks, Andy comes to me and says, dude, your students, we can hear them laughing and asking questions. What do you do? And go like, start swearing. Start swearing. It works. Norwegians are special. They like it.
I will say, teaching different cultures definitely has different types of things that excite, mannerisms, ways of helping. And it's important to understand those, right? And if it's cursing or cussing or being inappropriate, that's definitely the way to get to it. But no, I appreciate it, Carlos. And we'll wrap this up. But thanks so much for coming on and for all you do and the research team and leading the research team. And obviously, Chris, Kevin, and Scott, do amazing work. And, we have such a great team that integrates into kind of every aspect of our business to keep our folks sharp and have the right types of tools and technology and everything else that we have going on there. And, I think it was like 3 years running, no detection on Scoutmaster yet. So we'll keep that going. So, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. But thanks very much for coming on, man. Appreciate it.
Awesome.